Hey everyone, this is Emily Jane Akery.
And Adam Price.
And you're listening to the Relative Rhythms Podcast.
Today we are excited to introduce Brazilian tap dancer, musician, educator, and flautist Leonardo Dias.
Rio has taught tap in his home city of Porto Alegre and all over Brazil, including the massive Tap in Rio Tap Festival in Rio de Janeiro. He also plays at music venues all over, both as a percussive tap dancer and as a flautist.
He hosts his own podcast, A Voz dos Pés, a Portuguese language podcast exploring research and history related to tap dance. And he has done a lot of work translating English language histories and articles about tap into Portuguese for his community.
We talk about the tap dance scene in Brazil, other percussive dance forms native to the country, the difficult and complex economic, racial, and language barriers to learning an imported art form such as tap in Brazil, and some of his techniques for improvisation and playing with live musicians.
Please welcome to the podcast, Leonardo Dias.
Welcome to the podcast.
Just an honor to have you on, Leo. Could you just give us like a brief introduction?
On me?
Yeah.
Well, what can I say? I'm a guy who grew up in the countryside, which is something that I carry with me with a lot of love. I started tap when I was 10, and it's been like 30 years without stop. So yeah, quite a while, quite a few times I felt like dropping everything and just move to something more profitable. But no, I didn't.
Feel that.
And well, I live in this city called Porto Alegre. Porto Alegre is a capital city, the southernmost capital city in Brazil, in the state of Rio Grande do Sul. We're actually closer to Montevideo or Buenos Aires than we are to Rio de Janeiro or São Paulo. Yeah, and I've been here trying to tap my life on as well as I can. Yeah.
What first brought you to the tap dance?
My cousin. Yeah. I have this cousin called Isabel Villadino. She was then starting to teach jazz dance and tap dance. And she didn't have students, so she went all over the family, picking the kids to start a tap dance class. And as she did so, by the end of the first year, I kind of knew I wouldn't stop anymore, which was kind of weird because I was 11. Yeah. How can you be sure of anything at all at 11, right?
At 11.
Yeah. But turns out that I was right. I didn't stop. And all my life I've been living in this city and in this state. In the last few years, I have had the luck to work in other parts of Brazil and in festivals and stuff. But my tap dance life and my family life, everything is here in the south of Brazil. Yeah.
Was it like a kind of a studio setting where she taught the tap and jazz classes and lots of kids come and just take like a weekly class? Is that kind of the setup?
Yeah, precisely that. Yeah. Dance schools, it's where most of the teaching is done in Brazil, right? We learn tapping in dance schools, the same schools where you go to learn ballet, hip hop, or anything else. And that's where I started. Yeah.
Nice. Do you feel like it is kind of on par with, say, the ballet or the hip hop in terms of how much it's offered? I know for here in the States, sometimes tap gets like it's kind of like the bottom of the barrel when it comes to dance schools. Do you feel like that in Brazil or no?
Well, it depends on where in Brazil you are. The thing is, if you're not in a city where you have good tap dance, real good tap dance, like the ones in the state of São Paulo, they have a tradition of good tap dancing there. They are exporting tap dance for a while now. And so they have these schools where you only have tap.
Oh, wow.
Big schools. It's weird. It's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, that's super uncommon here.
Oh, yeah, here too.
Yeah.
It's not a common thing, but what you see is if you're not in Sao Paulo or Rio, people really don't know much about tap. I mean, of course, there are lots of excellent exceptions to this rude thing I just said.
Right.
But for instance, in my city, tap dance used to be taught in ballet classes, in the end of ballet classes, like 15 minutes of tap after ballet.
Interesting.
In such an untapish way, let's say it like this.
Yes.
So yeah, and then there's the floor thing, which is a problem everywhere you go. Good floors for tap dancing, and in festival, in competitions, if you're not in a tap dance competitions, and those are rare, then usually people are not very interested in what you're doing.
So then, did you have, that being the case, and you knew you weren't going to stop tap dancing? What was your vision for yourself for that? I mean, are you living out your 11-year-old dream? Is that
the main thing for me is to be in the room tapping or with musicians tap dancing. I never had much care if I would get famous or rich, or if I would be abroad doing that. I just wanted to be doing it. So I don't know if I am living the dream, because I'm not sure if I ever pictured that dream that clearly. But I'd say I've done the best I could so far. I'm very fond of the many hours alone practicing. I'm very fond of the musicians I've been knowing in the way. I think it's not too much to say that maybe in my place, I was one of the first guys who realized I should be around musicians and practicing improv and stuff. And now it's much more common than when I started. But yeah, there are things to be proud of, I guess. I've been teaching for the last 25 years in different settings. Been in a few shows around here. Been doing stuff with musicians, been playing. So yeah, I think I'm good. I think I don't have anything to complain about.
So you were learning tap in like a studio setting. When did you make the transition from like a more choreographic mindset into a more like musical improv mindset? When did you start playing with musicians and learning in that way?
Yeah. What happened? It's a great question, because I wasn't raised in the jazz tradition, for instance, right? In any way. But I had some improvisers in my family before me, not around tap or jazz at all. I mean, my father, for instance, he plays the harmonica, the blues harp.
Yeah.
Nobody ever taught him. And he plays in an improvisational way. And I've been around. So I think this has something to do with that. It was common in my family that we had this gatherings where we would go around someone playing guitar and singing, and I had this little baroque flute. You know this?
Oh, cool! Yeah,
it was like improvising a few notes there. So what happens is when I start learning tap dance in a very, I'd say, Europeanized way, maybe I could say that. I mean, you have a warm up, a bar exercise, and then 2 or 3 technique exercises in a routine in the end of the class. I had a lot of that, really, and something was a little off all the time. So when I started working with improv, I started because I needed that, not because I saw someone doing it. Or had someone to follow, right? I've been trying to improv since forever. And then when YouTube comes around, and I was like 18 years old, like that late, I became aware of Jimmy Slide, Savion Glover, Dormitia, Sunbury Edwards, and all the cats. Before that, I was just doing whatever I felt. So I think it's something, I don't know, a personality trait that I have, this need to improv. And then I met jazz, and I met, I don't know if I can say that, it's a little bit rude again, but tap properly done, right? And it's been a struggle since then to really try to understand the tradition, honor the tradition, and know everything I have to know to actually be able to improvise, right? Which is a lot.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that you were improvising and now you feel the need to learn how to improvise, even though you've been doing it your whole tap life, right? It's almost like the more you know, the less you feel like you know.
For sure.
Yeah, right. That's precisely how I feel.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm curious because this is just a conversation Adam and I have a lot about, the history of jazz and tap dance. Was that ever talked about? And if so, or if not, how do you approach that as a teacher now in terms of time and space to incorporate the history in your teaching settings?
It's fuzzy, really, because I was so young. My teacher introduced me to the white tradition of tap dance, right? So from that, I knew what we could call the classics: Fred Astaire, Gene Kelly, the musicals, and some of the musical theater, which I loved to see when I was a kid. And then I started to listen to jazz first, because I did. I don't know why, really. It just clicked. That it was a good thing to listen to, and I started to, more like a feeling that it had something to do with that. I didn't have the information I needed. Then there was this band in my city called Sexteto Blas. It was a sextet, a jazz sextet. Awesome work, really good improviser, a lot of pressure, a lot of drive, playing fast as hell. And I was a teen, so I thought this was great and the best you could do. Cool. I started a friendship with these guys, which were way beyond me, really. They're just professional musicians, and I was just trying to get there. And they allowed me to play with them sometimes. I remember we played Ornithology from Charlie Parker a few times in this bar. And I wasn't even aware who was Charlie Parker, really. But I love the song. So the information, I was slowly becoming aware of little things about jazz and tap. It was a slow process. At some point, I understood that jazz and tap came from the same place and they have a straight relation. A little further ahead, I started to understand Dixieland, swing, bop, and so on. And then there came the pandemics. And I think many tap dancers started to read more, listen more in this time. I had a few things in my head by then, but then in Brazil started a very important movement of, I don't know precisely how to say that in English, but we started to see a need to affirm the Black tradition of tap. We can maybe relate that to the whole George Floyd thing. It had a strong impact in the whole world, and in Brazil it wasn't different. We have a huge Black community in Brazil, and we have the whole set of problems: racism, violence. It's all here, and we started to see some professionals in Brazil, some Black scholars and tap dancers, struggling to make the history right, and to make people be aware of the black roots of tap dance. And so from that point on, people who were listening, not all of us, but the ones who were listening learned a lot in a very small span of time. And so here I am. I'm reading right here. I have this book you might know.
Oh yeah.
Trying to import books, listen to people, listen to the fellow tap dancers who are ahead in the journey of knowledge, watching videos and trying to become aware of stuff that we are not aware in Brazil. We are a little too late in this conversation right here.
I don't know if I would say that. I mean, you might feel that way, but I think that people across the world, but also in the United States, probably felt that way a little bit too. I mean, it's also a struggle, a constant struggle, I think, to make sure that as a community, we are honoring the tradition. And I mean, it is in some ways, it's a large community, right? You have tiny studios all over the world teaching tap dance, right? But that aren't necessarily connected into the smaller, like what we think of as our like tap dance community that might not understand the importance and the importance of teaching that tradition. So I don't think it's just you. It's definitely not just you or just Brazil or just anything like that. It's definitely, there's been a movement, I think, across the whole community over the last 5 to 10 years.
It's been around, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But it's funny because actually it's been around forever. Right?
Yeah.
Right.
So I don't know. It's again, it's fuzzy to me because I've been aware of tap being a black tradition from my 20s, maybe, but I didn't understand the consequences of this concept until later, much later, when I started reading not only about tap, but about history, race, and all the package, colonialism and stuff.
Sure.
So it is a really big change in the mindset. I mean, I have dreams about the subject, really. And in Brazil right now, every now and then happens something that is, let's just put it as it is. We see racism happening all the time. And we sometimes feel the difficult to discuss what happens because we don't really understand what racism is from a sociological point, from a less shallow point of view. Maybe I could say that. We have been talking in Brazil right now among the tap community about racial lettering. Can you say that in English? Like you learn to read race. The ABCs of race. Okay. So we've been trying to educate ourselves, the ones who are interested in trying to do that, especially as white people, right? To have the tools we need to know what to do. And it's not simple, really. Again, I have nightmares about the subject. It's a lot of reading, a lot of talking. You have to be very caring and sensitive to understand what is being said. And we have a long way to go. So trying to be objective about what you just asked to me about how do I get this to my classes, I don't know. I've been trying to talk a lot about that. I've been trying to move further away from some ways of teaching that I think are not really the thing, as I say. I've been trying to get the circle around, the improv around, the music, the musical knowledge around. I just started teaching in this new school right now in 2024. And as I stepped in the place, I knew they were really not aware of anything but musical theater. And then I thought, I've been studying this subject from the last 5 years. They don't know anything. How can I start? So I just wrote in a text file the names of like 40 different black tap dancers from the tradition, and I like folded the papers, put it all in a bag. And the first thing that we did in the class was I just passed the bag around and I said, "This is going to be your lucky tap dancer for 2024."
Oh, cool. Yeah.
The thing is, they didn't know any of those tap dancers. I went from Juba to Aya del Casal, this great span of time, picking up the names, and that was interesting, really. I'm still trying to figure out how they felt to know so much they didn't know in such a short span of time, right?
You kind of touched on it earlier, but some of the work that you've been doing has been working on translating some of the information into Portuguese. And despite Brazil having one of the biggest tap communities in the world, it seems like a lot of information isn't getting there just because of a language barrier and a lack of interest into bringing those documents and scholarly papers into Brazil and being able to read them. How do you get resources to learn about tap in Brazil?
Well, the language barrier is very real. Thing is, it's expensive to learn English in Brazil.
Sure, yeah.
So you have an economic limit that for a start, right? I had the privilege to study English since I was 12, so I have the access, but many of my students don't have. And as it is a matter of money, as you go further away from the privilege, it gets harder, right? That being said, there are a few writers in Brazil who are trying to, I was going to say rewrite the history, but this wouldn't sound right. It would be like writing the right history, or at least the complete history, or a history that does not erase the creators of the art form. Right now, I am in a master's degree, trying to lose my calmness and sleep, writing a dissertation here. And I, in my research, found two writers who are writing from this Afro-diasporic, is something we've been saying in Brazil, point of view. They are called Ana Gori and Lucas Santana. Lucas Santana is actually one of the tap dancers in Music of the Soul from Leonardo Sandoval. Yeah, he's great, and he has a very strong style of writing. Ana Gori is another tap dancer who is trying to write from an academic point of view, right? Apart from that, there are a few efforts, right? This thing I do in my podcast is really small, but it's something. There's a lot to be done. There's a lot to be done, really. I'd say the teachers who are committed to pass on the tradition and have the privilege to know English are doing the best they can. But there is a long way to go. So, yeah, it's hard. It's hard. Yeah. But I'm not complaining. We're going to do it. At some point, we're going to get there. We have to gather more people to work in translation, really. Or to write from a Brazilian perspective, maybe. Not necessarily translating books or articles, but trying to write for us here, right? Because either we do that or we are still telling the tale that tap dance is only Fred Astaire and Gene Kelly forever and ever and ever.
Yeah.
Right.
Why do you think Brazil has such a big tap community? Like there are thousands of honestly, I don't know how many countries, hundreds of countries in the world, and tap has been kind of exported to most of them to some extent. But it seems like outside of the US, Brazil has such a love for the art form. And I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on why that might be.
I have some thoughts. I'm not sure of anything, but first of all, I think we are a huge country. There is a lot of people here, so it has an impact on how big is this market, right? It is so big we can't really say there is one Brazil. I mean, you travel 1,000 kilometers, it's another country, really. We just speak the same language and have the same government. So this is one thing. Also, Brazil has strong influence from US, especially after the Second World War. We've been buying US a lot for the good and for the bad, right? And this is all around Latin America, right? But Brazil is especially attached to North American culture, US culture, from a long time. That being said, we know musical theater. At some point, dance schools thought it was a good idea to have tap because of musical theater. And I'm guessing here, right? Really, it's just a guess. And I think it's a safe guess because when you go to the schools and see the work that is being done, it's similar to musical theater in the sense that there are characters, there is a scene, there is a choreography that has to do with the plot in the show necessarily. So that's what comes to Brazil first, and that has a space in dance schools as a product, right? And as we are so big with so many dance schools, maybe that's the reasons. The reason I don't know. I'm just really just guessing here. Maybe the main factor is the size of the country, and also the fact that people, especially from all states, but especially from Rio and São Paulo, have been doing a work in terms of tap festivals and bringing professionals from US and recently from Europe too, since the 90s, right? So we have 30 years of struggle to get tap here. Right now, I'm in touch with tap dancers, for instance, in Uruguay, Argentina, and Chile, and I see that are pretty much where we were in the 90s, starting a movement. So yeah, we have huge festivals here. That has this is something to be considered.
This is the Relative Rhythms podcast, and you're listening to our conversation with Leonardo Dias. This podcast is a labor of love, and we are currently supported entirely by our listeners. If you like what you hear, you can help support our work by subscribing to our Patreon. By doing so, you gain full access to all of our uncut interviews and extra content. You can sign up at patreon.com/relativerhythms. You can also support us by rating and leaving us a review wherever you are listening, and by following us on all the socials at Relative Rhythms. Thank you again to all our Patreon supporters, and now, back to our conversation with Leo.
I'm curious about your culture's traditional, or how do you say, like percussive dance. I see every culture seems to have their own kind of percussion dance. And so I'm interested in how connected or not tap is to the traditions of the percussion dance of your area, if at all.
Maybe you could tell us what the percussive dance is in Rio Grande do Sul.
In my place.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we have something called chula. Thing is, in my place, we relate a lot with Argentina and Uruguay culture. So we have this kind of footwork, which is danced with the traditional. How do you say that? The clothes, the figurine, and you have a spare in the floor, and there are this competition where you have to dance a few bars going forward over the spare, and then you have to go back doing exactly the same step you did.
Interesting.
And most people don't improvise because it's very competitive, really, really, really competitive. Masculine, you have no girls doing it, or almost no girls. Rio Grande do Sul has a very macho culture in the worst sense. Yeah. Well, now I just said it's true. What can I say? And it's danced to the same music, the same song, always. It's like we have an accordion that plays something that goes all over the place. I don't like it very much, really.
I could tell.
yeah, it's, you can see that, right? But then, for instance, if you go further to the south and to Argentina and Uruguay, you have this form called malambo. Malambo is connected to chacarera, which is a rhythm from Southern America that has this delicious 6/8. And then you can dance with a boot or without a boot. Yeah, it's cool. And if you move further to the north and northeastern Brazil, you have other forms, lots of different indigenous forms. I think this is the word, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's this teacher, which is one of my mentors, I would say, Valeria Pinheiro. She is nearly 70 now. And she spent her whole life connecting tap to the northeastern traditions of footwork and music.
Mm-hmm.
And then she's really known in the tap community. She knew Jimmy Slide, right? She
cool.
She went to US a couple times as an invitee to festivals. She went to Chicago Human Living Project as Brazilian guest. She went to Africa. She went to Sahara. She's like a force of the nature. And
That's awesome.
she's a good example of someone connected to tap, but primarily connected to the tradition of her own place. Yeah, but those are rare examples. Actually, people in Brazil are mostly dancing. I see a lot of pop music of all trends, some research on jazz and samba. There is some good guys researching how to connect samba and tap.
That's cool.
And that's
Cool.
Yeah, this is what I can see, right?
Yeah.
From my place. Maybe someone in Rio or São Paulo would give you a different perspective.
So
Yeah,
are the different with the exceptions that you mentioned, are the different kind of communities pretty segregated? There's not much like cross-cultural exchange between the different like rhythmic dance art forms?
It is rare that you're going to see someone who knows, for example, catira, which is a northeastern footwork that Valeria works very well. You won't see it in dance schools or festivals. Malambo. You're going to see Malambo in Malambo festivals, which are a whole separated segment,
Yeah.
right? I'd say in the mainstream, which in Brazil is competitive festivals, competitions, and the work that is done in schools, sometimes you see traces of that, but not deep research. Yeah, you won't see it much. It's not a matter of cross culture. It's a matter of lack of interest. It's that simple.
In the traditional dances, you mean?
Yeah. It's sad, but it's true.
Interesting. I wonder, like, it seems like tap has, although it didn't start as like a Western kind of scholastic kind of like track, it has kind of moved into like the studio setting versus more folk, if you will, folk traditional art forms that have kind of not gone that route. And it seems like it's the same in Brazil. Like the folk traditions have kind of, I don't want to say it's been excluded, but maybe not welcomed into like a traditional studio setting in like a kind of Western cultural learning environment.
I think you put it very well. I think this is the whole thing. I might just say that maybe traditional cultures don't have an interest in mainstream, right? Because they still belong to the communities, and they are very much alive in the communities. Yeah, it's important that I'm saying that because maybe from what I said before, I could give you the impression that people in general are not interested in folk culture and traditional culture. It is not true. I'd say that mainstream have a shallow relationship with tradition. This could be more accurate. But for instance, if you go to northeastern Brazil, away from the mainstream and where the communities are, you're going to see the whole thing very strong and very much alive in the communities. The same thing here in Brazil, even with chula, this gaúcho tap that I don't like. Okay, I just said that. But it is a very strong thing. But in settings that are concerned with gaúcho tradition, you won't see it very much outside this niche. Can you say that?
Yeah.
And I think this is important and very confusing because tap is a folk tradition or a traditional dance that comes to Brazil through mainstream. That is a mess to understand. And that is even messier to undo, right?
Yeah.
I see some people that I admire and look very closely to their work. Anagori is one of these people who are making an effort to understanding the relationship between tap and Brazilian tradition from Africa as the link. And this, I just got the chills here, man. The work is beautiful because then we are talking about the Afro-diasporic, not Brazil or US.
Right.
We're going further to the past.
Right.
And there are beautiful things that come from that. Really beautiful things. It's like she's finding a way to understanding how is it possible to be a Brazilian people and honor the tradition, understanding that you are not someone from US, but linking to Africa. It is such an intelligent thing to do, such a hard thing to do also, but she's researching real deep. She's digging, really.
Interesting.
I think it's so important and hard to understand how you can fit into an art form that maybe doesn't feel like it was yours to begin with. I mean, even as myself as a white person, understanding that has been a journey, and I still nowhere near the end of it. I'm still, every day is a little bit of a struggle. Like, how do we honor this, and how do we this thing that we love so much, right? How do we exist within it and not feel like you're taking something away from the tradition?
Right. It's not appropriating it. It's tough.
This is the $1 million question, I guess.
Yeah.
I have this discipline in the master degree, this course taught by Celina Alcântara, Black actress from my place here. It's really about the relationship between arts and race. She's talking specifically about that. And the first thing she does when she starts the discipline is getting everything in a circle and saying, now describe yourself. And she starts. And she says, I'm a Black woman with long hair. My face is such and such. I'm wearing this and that. I'm cisgender. You say this. This is how you say it in English.
Yep.
And she defines herself in terms of gender and race for a start. And then the circle went on, and it was my turn, and I did it. And I just realized that I learned that I was white right there on the spot. I didn't know I was white. Right?
That's so interesting.
Do you see what I mean here? the size of the problem.
Right. Because being white was just the default, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. This is the problem. So we are now reading things and discussing things that try to understand whiteness, right? I've been used to be white and not thinking about that my whole life. I'm 40, right? So as I racialize my identity and understand the whole thing about privilege and history, I mean, my great-grandfather had lots of land. Of course, it has something to do with the fact that I can speak English right now.
Sure.
But I had to think a little bit about that, right? So I really don't know what to answer specifically, but I think it has something to do with how I deal with whiteness and history. And to know as a tap dancer how to do that in Brazil, it's the conversation, the one conversation we're trying to have, actually.
Yeah.
Some of us. Yeah.
Right.
Everywhere. Yeah, everywhere. And it's I mean, goes for Adam and I both, because I was musical theater, that's my jam. And, as I grew up and as I've kind of, as you said, gone through this process of understanding and learning, researching, and, in conversations with Adam, as we talk about jazz music, same thing, right? Like jazz music, he's a white cis dude in a Black art form, just as much as I am a white cis chick in a very, Black art form. And how do you exist? And it's a conversation everywhere, everyone's having, which is, I think, a good thing, as you said, even though we're confused and we're probably not going to say the right thing a lot of the time. And as we're learning, I think it's a good conversation to continue to have.
I think right now, if you really love tap and you want to keep tapping, or for that matter, playing jazz, this is a mandatory conversation, right? This is not an option.
I do have one more question actually for you, if you're open to it.
Okay.
I'm curious what your experiences are. I know you have performed with musicians, you've jammed with musicians, and they've invited you into their settings, which is super cool. What is your maybe suggestions or encouragement for young tap dancers who might want to move into those settings? How would you encourage people to do that, and why?
I think the main thing is do it. Now, I have met just a few musicians who weren't really interested in tap. Most of the musicians I met were just crazy about what I was doing and were keen, really willing to exchange information and teach. I've learned a whole lot of things with musicians, percussionists especially. I think it's something that every tap dancer should do. Be in touch with musicians. Now, don't wait a second. How to do that? I don't know, just be really bold and go to a show and say, hey, can I tap here? You're going to get a few no's, and then you're going to get a yes, and you start a friendship, and maybe you have a gig, right? You're going to mess up and learn, but there is no other way. Let's just remember, tap is an oral tradition, right? You have to be there to understand what is going on. I can say from experience that my being around Latin American musicians and flamenco musicians was maybe the most important thing that happened to my career, can I say, my understanding of the art form, right? Listening to jazz live was key, was the thing, right? Maybe if I wasn't in touch with musicians and wasn't a musician myself, I would have quit tap a long time ago. Because the things that keep me interested in tap are the same things that are in the lives of musicians, right? How to be together, how to communicate, how to bring elements from different musical traditions to your work in order to communicate more broadly, better. So as for why, I think it's such a pleasure. It's so meaningful. As for how, just go and do it. There is no shortcut. Sometimes I see courses of musical theory aimed to tap dancers. I sometimes feel they don't fill the gap, in a sense that they are trying to teach you the different divisions of time in music sheets and stuff, and the 4/4 thing, the 2/4 thing, and this is all very important. I'm not saying it isn't, but there are things you just learn if you are beside the drummer. Mm-hmm. There is no shortcut. Mm-hmm. Like there is no meaning, for instance, to say that candombe goes yeah, you're moving your head, right? You have to move your head to understand what it means. You can't just read it or make it become math. It's just not there, right? So yeah, I'd say teachers should try to bring musicians to class when they can. I mean, it's not always that easy. You have to pay the musicians. It's something you should do, for God's sake, right? Here in my place, I have this flamenco group they're really good friends, and they were the first guys who get me to tell me to my face, you are a musician. You are. Do it. I'm very grateful for them. Flamenco del Puerto, it's called. And they have the privilege to have classes daily with an awesome guitar player.
Wow, nice.
It is so cool, right? And of course, he gets paid for that. I really would like to have a drummer or a bass or a clarinet, for that matter. And I think if teachers could try to do it, sometimes it would be really, really, really awesome. It's not a small thing. I mean, it opens a hole in the whole dance school conception of rehearsing to the show. It's a whole new thing. Also a very old thing. So it's something we should try. And what can I say? As an artist, for me, this is the gig, to be around musicians. There is no other thing, really. I know. What do you guys have to say about the subject?
Oh,
yeah.
Agreed. Definitely agreed. It was hard for me. It's still hard for me. Because I think because of our training, right? I was trained, as you kind of were mentioning, this kind of like Eurocentric way of training, like you do. a tendu, and then you do a dégagé. You like these
Yeah,
building
yeah.
blocks, and everything must be perfect before you move on to the next thing. And so this idea of just being able to first of all, improvisation in general, I was not taught that, and even more so thrown into an environment where you're like improvising, and also somebody else is also maybe improvising. You're not, nobody's set is like the scariest thing to me.
It is
Because
scary.
we weren't taught. I was not taught that way, and that was even like you knew exactly what you were going to do when you stepped on that stage, or when you went across that floor. You were told, right? And so it's still very scary for me and hard, and I'm just trying to keep pushing myself out there, but
Yeah, it's a struggle. Yeah.
yeah.
It took me 20 years, some 15 years to have the guts to go on a stage without the choreography. I was practicing my whole life. And okay, now I can do it without having a heart attack. But in some places, not everywhere.
Yeah. You
Yeah.
kind of brought up something interesting. You said it took you a long time to have the courage to do it without choreography, and now you do it all the time. Is there a difference in your approach to practice now, like before, like in a choreographic, like studio setting kind of Eurocentric mindset, versus practice that helps you to be more of a musician, more of an improviser, sitting in these musical settings as opposed to these choreographic settings? Does the practice change?
Yeah, sure. I'm such an addict to improvisation that I never really studied choreography, to the point that I suck when I try to choreograph things. Really, I really do. I know my weaknesses, right? And I have a hard time even preparing a traditional class to teach, because I wasn't trained to that. All the time I was alone practicing. I was practicing improv. What took time was understanding that I was validated as an artist in a tradition that is based on improv, and understand that to the point that I'm okay with doing that. I have listened people saying that going onto a stage and just improv would be disrespectful to the audience. Someone said that to me once, and I was raised in that environment, which is,
Interesting.
well, Eurocentric.
Yeah.
Period.
Right.
Right. It's another conception.
Right.
But getting to the question, the thing I have been trying to do really my whole life is understanding how to practice and teach improv. Some people say you don't teach improv. I don't agree. I think when the old cats like Honeycombs or Bunny or whoever you say were with each other trading steps, this is teaching. Maybe you were not doing the teaching you are used to seeing in dance schools, but it is how the knowledge is spread and how it evolves, right? So, well, I was alone most of the time I was practicing, and I've been like guided by intuition to understand that I should practice around musical concepts, right? So, small rhythm cells, the creation of grooves that could work as a way in and out of improv, like a home base, based in different music concepts, like I don't know, funk or even jazz or this Latin stuff that I've been studying. Composing the grooves, have the grooves neatly done in my body so that I don't have to think about them. Lots of technique, lots of pedal in the row, and let's do it till it gets good. Time division, like the whole thing. triplets, sextets, the whole thing. But mostly, I think I've been trying to practice understanding musical concepts and trying to create, how can I say that? Create ways to put those musical concepts in my body, right? In a way that I don't have to think about them anymore. So one of the things I found out is that if my mind can't sing the rhythms, I'm not doing anything, right? If I can't go if you don't have it first, you're not really aware of what you're doing, right? There's this guitarist from my place here called Nicola Spolidoro. You knew Nicola when you came here. He has the beautiful ability to whistle what he's improvising in guitar. Like the same notes. He whistles as he improvises.
Yeah.
Just like John Pizzarelli does when he scats and plays at the same time. This is the thing, right? You're thinking musically before you even touch the floor. And that takes some strategies to practice, right? You can just go and expect it's going to be all right. It's not. You have to practice. Understanding musical form is something I care about. Like, honestly, don't take me wrong, but when you see flamenco, jazz becomes easy, really. In terms of form, flamenco is crazy, man. Really. They count to 12, but 1 means nothing. 12 means sometimes the end or sometimes the beginning of the bar. The rhythms go all away from the accent, the strong beat. So it's messy. But understanding where the form starts, where it finishes, where is the emphasis, not from an intellectual point of view, but from listening and trying again and again and again and again. I like to practice with, how to say that? Play-alongs, backing tracks.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it helps to get the form in your brain, right? For jazz, especially. And yeah, music, how do I practice this? And then I know these steps. Can I practice this form with these steps? How do I do that? And then there comes the body-brain thing, right? And as I speak, I understand that it's not much different from practicing any instrument in an improvisational way, right? It's the same thing.
Thank you, Leo. I feel like you gave us a lot to think about, a lot of great conversation. Thank you for being brave enough to have some of these conversations with us. I appreciate it. It's definitely takes some self-awareness and some confidence and willingness to be able to talk about our art forms and talk about race and talk about how we exist inside them. And so we're just grateful that you were able to be on with us today and be willing to have those conversations. We appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
You've been listening to our conversation with Leonardo Dias. You can find Leo on the socials at LeotapDias. That's LeoTapDias. And you can listen to his podcast, A Voz dos Pés, on all the podcasting platforms. If you liked our conversation today, please follow us and leave a rating or a review wherever you are listening. And if you'd like to support our work, you can do so on our Patreon, where we catalog our full, uncut interviews.
Our opening theme for The Love of It was composed by Adam. Our midroll music was Ventura, and our outroll music is Mons. Both are unreleased tracks composed and performed by Leo Dias.
Don't forget to follow us on the socials at Relative Rhythms. And if you liked what you heard today and want to send us a message, you can do so through our website, relativerhythms.com.
Shortly after we recorded this episode, Leo's state of Rio Grande do Sul experienced its worst flooding in recorded history. Hundreds died and thousands were displaced. Leo is safe and back home, however, the rebuilding will take years. Things are slowly coming back, but the economic impact of the flooding has been devastating. As of the release of this episode, the state's Seoul International Airport is still closed, with no opening date in sight. Leo has been working with some humanitarian nonprofits in the area. If you are interested in helping in any way, send him a message on Instagram. He can give you more information and direct you to other ways to help.
The goal of this podcast is to bring the music and dance communities closer together, not only in the US but around the world. Music and dance are universal to the human experience. We hope to create understanding and empathy not only for our individual art forms, but also for our friends around the world. Lines in the sand do not determine one's worthiness to life, liberty, or the pursuit of happiness. In the future, we are looking forward to bringing more guests on from different countries and different backgrounds.
Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next episode.